I was about 8 years old when I first read The Calculus Affair, the 18th Tintin adventure by Hergé. The Calculus Affair is a wonderful kidnapping chase story tinged with international espionage and even hints of science fiction. But in that first read, one thing made a deep impression on me, and that was this small moment in which Tintin figures out that their kidnapped friend had been, in fact, in a car that they had investigated. The seat was a little higher than normal, Tintin remembers. A couple of pages later, this hypothesis is confirmed. And although I didn't have the vocabulary at the time, this idea of the hollow back seat, I can retroactively safely say, blew my mind. Flash forward 5 years, I'm 13 years old at a neighborhood friend's house, and I find a Batman comic, one with a very sinister Joker on the cover. That comic is insane, my friend says. So of course, I borrow it and take it home and read The Killing Joke. The entire tone of the story was so alien to me, this fevered dream or nightmare approach, and yet so grimy. And then when we get to the scene in which the Joker shoots Barbara Gordon, the violence of that scene, of that bullet wound, it made a deep impression on me. Followed as it was later in the story by the tormenting of Commissioner Gordon. Here were dark and disturbing things happening to a major character in Batman lore. Perhaps I was a sheltered 13-year-old at that time. I hadn't watched movies like RoboCop, or even the deaths of Bonnie and Clyde and Sonny Corleone from the movies had not yet been something that I had experienced. So the violent effects of the bullets and the vulnerability of the nudity that is insinuated, if not explicitly shown, in the context of a Batman comic is definitely something I would say blew my mind. Now, of course, the reason I'm talking about all this is because day 9 of 31 Days of Comics, 31 Days of Comics is the game that we're playing on this channel. Previous episodes linked in the playlist in the description below and up here. Because day 9 of 31 Days of Comics asks for a comic that blew your mind. And of course, the first thing I want to talk about is, what does it mean for me to have my mind blown? Or more accurately, what has it meant through the years? And that's where these two instances of The Calculus Affair and The Killing Joke come in, because although they're far from the only instances in which young me had my mind blown, they do seem to curiously represent the two major types of mind-blowing I used to experience up till a certain point of time. What blew my mind, not just in comics, but in movies and in prose, could be so different, but they were usually either, like in The Calculus Affair, something that has been set up or presented as normal is subverted into being something else. That could be a rule of the world, like in science fiction, or it could be a person's alibi in a murder mystery, something that subverted my expectations, something that reappropriated my expectations, could blow my mind. Or like The Killing Joke, you could show me something, you could give me a story that I had not seen before, something that I didn't even know was possible, maybe within a genre, but also maybe within a medium. When thinking about the prompt, a comic that blew your mind, I think the tendency is naturally to focus on the blowing of the mind, the nature of the trickery or the cleverness or the smartness in either the plot or the representation. But the part that maybe gets a little overlooked is your mind. The subjectivity at the core of this prompt, I think, is integral, because I think it is fairly universal that the younger you are, by which we probably represent the less you have read, the less you have experienced, the more easy it is to blow your mind. When you know fewer things to expect, when you're aware of fewer tricks, when you've heard fewer punchlines, almost anything you encounter has the chance of being new, having a huge effect in augmenting your reality. As you absorb more, as you experience more, you learn more and more tricks. And that's why I think people like me might sometimes feel that things blow their mind less and less as they get older. They've just seen it before. They've seen some variation on it before, and it simply isn't as revelatory as it is to somebody else. Now, does that mean that people who have read a lot or experienced a lot are just more jaded and less thrillable? I think that would be a very facile interpretation of this. At least what I found in film, in prose, and yes, eventually in comics, that third type of having your mind blown became for me having my mind blown by what someone has achieved as an artistic triumph. The use of the comics medium, in my favorite use of it, which is storytelling, how well has the comics medium been exploited, if not explored, balance the delicacy and the unique alchemy that makes works as good as they are. I can still enjoy a sci-fi paradox or a twist in the tale, but I'm not enjoying them for the novelty of never having seen them before. The blowing of my mind now comes with the high wire trapeze act that the creators are putting into the work. But for this video, I want to select the title that started it all for me. The first comic for me that matched the density and the texture of great literature and great cinema. Watchmen, written by Alan Moore, drawn by Dave Gibbons, and colored by John Higgins. Now, for some of you, it might seem a bit of a cliche to put Watchmen in this category, but I do mean this autobiographically. Watchmen blew my mind because it read on every panel, on every page, as something that could only be a comic, but was getting the power of its storytelling from the reading of the comic itself. I know a lot has been made about its dysfunctional, realistic superheroes and the darkness of the story and the violence in it, and I do think that a lot has also been pointed out about how those are all the wrong lessons to learn from what made Watchmen great. I would say those are the tools the creators are using in order to really achieve what they're doing, creating a comic that is a pleasure to read as a comic. They do this through thematic, expressionistic, impressionistic, motif uses. They use language and puns, media of all forms from pirate comics to perfume commercials, blend together and borrow from each other. Reading Watchmen makes you feel smart because of the way Alan Moore and Dave Gibbons and John Higgins are able to use every single facet of the comics medium to reveal things to you layer by layer, to add things on top of things layer by layer, and you can keep track of all of them. You can remember and you can link things up. And the most important thing is you're not doing this in order to find out who the bad guy is or to solve the puzzle. That might be things characters in the story are doing. What you're doing is you're reading a comic. Pop lyrics and cinematic jump cuts are not used with affectation or just to have them as a reference. Every single strand of Watchmen is woven together to give it the unique texture that it has even today. For me and my personal reading, Watchmen opened a door that showed me perhaps the way that The Killing Joke and The Calculus Affair had showed me what else was possible in comics. And although there were some wrong lessons learned from Watchmen, there were plenty of correct ones as well. Since Watchmen, I have read many comics that give me the same kind of pleasure of the layering with the density and with the total embrace of the comics medium the way that Watchmen does. I could keep talking about Watchmen, but I remember that I have done that. I have a number of videos on Watchmen, and I'll link those below as well. Now I'm thinking about a top 10 mind-blowing comics belonging more to the third category than the first two. But before I get too distracted, I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on mind-blowing comics and what your pick is for day 9 of 31 Days of Comics. Thank you so much for watching. This has been For the Love of Comics, and I'll see you at the next video.